In the summer of 1891, in a dust-pale corner of eastern Montana, a town called Harwick watched a woman they had, long ago, decided to forget walk into the most important meeting of the year and quietly save every man in it from himself. Her name was Evelyn Marsh. She was 34 years old, widowed 3 years prior, and she kept the books for 6 ranches in the county. Not because anyone had asked her to learn, but because her father had taught her numbers the way other men taught their sons to ride. She had learned both. The town only knew about one. The man who hired her, grudgingly, every spring, was Porter Aldane, who ran the largest operation south of the river, and who told his neighbors she was temporary, that he was looking for a proper accountant, that the arrangement was a convenience and nothing more. He said this long enough that people stopped questioning it. He said it so often that Evelyn suspected he had started to believe it himself. She did not mind. She had learned not to mind. What she minded, quietly and without complaint, was being the reason something went wrong when she had done everything right. The summer of 1891 was dry enough to crack the earth in long, pale lines, and the cattlemen were nervous. A land broker from Billings named Harlan Cade had come to Harwick in June with promises of consolidated grazing leases and shared water rights that would let the smaller outfits survive what everyone agreed was going to be a brutal fall. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday evening in the back room of the courthouse, and every rancher within 20 miles made arrangements to attend. Evelyn was not invited. She found out about it the way she found out about most things in Harwick. Through the narrow crack between what people said around her and what they said when they thought she had left the room. She had been at the land office that afternoon returning a survey ledger, and Harlan Cade himself had been there, speaking with Gerald Poe, the county recorder, in the low, satisfied voice of a man who had already closed a deal in his own mind. "Aldane's agreeable," Cade said. "So is Sutter. The rest will follow." "And the Marsh woman?" Poe asked. Not unkindly, simply as one would ask about a fence post. "Is it there? Is it in the way? Does it need to be moved?" Cade glanced toward the door where Evelyn was not quite visible. "She doesn't hold land. She holds ledgers. She won't be at the table." Evelyn finished her errand. She walked home in the long afternoon heat, with her hands folded, and her stride even, and the particular stillness behind her ribs that came not from hurt but from recognition. She had been not at the table before. She knew the shape of it. What concerned her was not the slight. What concerned her was the numbers. She had spent the better part of 3 weeks working through Porter Aldane's ranch accounts, and she had found something buried in the middle of a water rights agreement from 1887 that nobody seemed to have read carefully, possibly ever. A clause that granted the original survey company first option on any consolidated lease arrangement affecting the northern pastures, which was precisely what Harlan Cade was proposing. If that clause held, and Evelyn believed it did, Cade's deal would hand an outside company legal claim over more than half the grazing land in the agreement before the ink was dry. She had tried to tell Porter Aldane on Wednesday. He had listened for 40 seconds, nodded slowly, and said he would look into it. Then he had asked whether she had finished the quarterly tally yet. She had finished it on Monday. Friday arrived hot and still. The cottonwoods along the creek stood motionless in the airless dusk. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with a lamp and the survey agreement and a sheet of her own notations laid out in clear parallel columns, and she went over it a 4th time in case she was wrong. She was not wrong. She folded the papers into her bag, put on her good jacket, and walked to the courthouse. The meeting had already started. She could hear voices. Through the closed door, 3 or 4 men talking over each other in the particular way men talked when they were on the edge of agreeing to something and wanted to reach agreement before anyone could introduce doubt. She knocked once. The talking stopped. Someone said, "Come in," with the tone of a man who expected a secretary. Porter Aldane looked up from his chair. His expression moved through surprise, irritation, and something she could not quite name before settling on guarded neutrality. "Evelyn," he said. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, and meant it. "There's something in the water rights agreement that needs to be seen before this is signed." Harlan Cade sat at the head of the table. He was younger than she had expected, compact and well-dressed, with the kind of easy confidence that came from winning most rooms before he entered them. He looked at her the way men looked at things that had arrived out of place, not hostile, simply arranging the inconvenience. "Ma'am," he said pleasantly, "this is a private meeting. I'm aware of that." Evelyn set her bag on the empty chair nearest the door. She did not wait for permission to open it. "I keep the accounts for 4 of the men in this room, and I found a clause in the 1887 survey agreement that affects the northern pasture leases directly. I'd like 5 minutes." Nobody moved. The silence was the particular kind that comes not from rudeness but from uncertainty. None of them sure whether to be annoyed or alarmed. Walter Breen, who ran a mid-sized outfit east of town and who had always treated Evelyn with the plain decency of a man raised to be courteous, even when he didn't understand why, said quietly, "Let her talk." Cade opened his hands in a gesture of generous patience. Evelyn set the survey agreement on the table and pointed to the clause. She did not editorialize. She read the language plainly, explained what it meant in terms of the proposed consolidation, and put her own notations beside it so the numbers would be visible to anyone who wanted to verify her reading. She took 4 minutes. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Porter Aldane picked up her notations. He read them twice. His jaw moved slightly, the way it moved when he was working through something he did not want to have to work through. "This is valid," he said. "It's enforceable," Evelyn said. "I'm not a lawyer, but the language is plain." Cade leaned back. Some of the ease had gone out of his posture. "This could be renegotiated," he said carefully. "It could," Evelyn agreed, "but not tonight and not under the terms currently on the table." Another silence. Gerald Poe, who had been sitting very still since she'd walked in, now pulled the agreement toward himself and began reading. One by one, the other men leaned in. Evelyn stepped back. She did not need to watch them read. She had said what she came to say. She was nearly to the door when Porter Aldane said her name. She turned. He was holding her notations, and his expression had settled into something she had not often seen on his face. A kind of honest discomfort, the look of a man who understood, specifically, what he owed. "You should have been here from the start," he said. It was not a grand apology. It was not theatrical or elaborate. But it was plainly meant, spoken in front of 6 men who heard it without looking away, and Evelyn understood that this was Porter Aldane's version of contrition, quiet, direct, offered without excuse. "Yes," she said. "I should have." She left them to it. Outside, the night air had cooled a fraction. The courthouse steps were pale in the dark, and she sat on the bottom one for a moment, not from exhaustion, but from the particular release that followed a long-held tension. The papers were still in her bag. The lamplight still glowed behind the courthouse windows. Voices inside had resumed, slower now, more careful. She had not expected the words. She had expected the outcome. The deal reconsidered, the clause addressed, and she had come for that alone, not for acknowledgement, not for credit. But the words had happened, and they had mattered in the quiet, involuntary way that truth sometimes does when it finally speaks in the right room. The man who found her sitting on the steps was someone she did not know well. His name was Declan Rowe. He was 41 years old, though he looked older in the way of men who had spent years outdoors. And not enough years sleeping. He owned a small cattle operation up on the North Ridge. Nothing like Aldane's scale, the kind of place held together by precision rather than size. Every expense measured, every resource stretched with care. He had been in the meeting because his north pasture land was part of the proposed consolidation. He stopped when he saw her. He had the look of a man accustomed to not intruding. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Just sitting." He nodded once as though that were a perfectly sufficient answer, and sat down on the step above her, with the unhurried ease of a man who had no particular place to be and no particular need to fill silence. They sat without speaking for several minutes. From inside, the voices continued their slow, careful work. "I read the clause," Declan said finally. "Before the meeting. I'd flagged it myself, thought I was misreading it." He paused, wasn't sure enough to say anything. Evelyn looked at him. "Why not?" He was quiet a moment. "Because the room was full of men who'd already decided, and I've learned that being almost certain isn't the same as being certain enough." Another pause. "You were certain." "I went over it 4 times, she said. "That's the difference." He said it without judgment, simply as an observation. "I go over things twice. Maybe I should go over them 4 times. Evelyn almost smiled. 4 times catches things, twice misses. He nodded slowly. From somewhere down the street, a horse shifted against a post, the metal ring of the hitching rail ringing softly. "They'll table the deal," Declan said. "Kate'll go back to Billings and rework the language. Come back in 30 days with something cleaner." "Probably," Evelyn said. "And nobody in that room is going to stand up and say what would have happened if you hadn't walked in. I don't need them to." He looked at her then, directly, the way people rarely looked at her, not assessing, not weighing, simply paying attention. "I know," he said. "I'm saying it anyway." She had come to Harwick 2 years before her husband, Thomas, died. They had moved from Missouri with the usual ideas about land and space and a different kind of life. And Harwick had given them, both, the land, the space itself, the life. And then the spring of 1888 had come with a fever that took Thomas in 8 days and left Evelyn in a house that was now a quarter section of dry grass and 3 horses and accounts she knew better than anyone else in the county. She had stayed because leaving felt like agreement that Thomas's death had ended her life too, that Harwick was only a place she had come because of someone else, that without him there was nothing here worth holding. There was work she was good at and land she had learned to read, and mornings that still arrived with the particular pale gold light of eastern Montana that she had come, without intending to love. She stayed. She worked. She endured the specific quiet of a town that had decided what she was. Widow, temporary, useful but not permanent. And she endured it without making it the center of her days. Some days that was easier than others. The day after the courthouse meeting was not one of the easier ones. She went to the post office and felt the adjustment in the room, the way you felt a door open. Not a hostility, but a recalibration. People who had never thought about her, thinking about her now. The meeting had not been private in any meaningful sense. By morning, half the town knew a version of it. In a place the size of Harwick, versions multiplied quickly. At the dry goods counter, Priscilla Sutter, whose husband ran cattle on the eastern end, and who was pleasant in the particular way of a woman who had never needed to be anything else, said, "I heard you stopped them from signing something dreadful." Her voice was bright with the excitement of a story. That took nerve. "It took reading," Evelyn said. Priscilla laughed as though that were charming and moved on. Near the door, a man named Fowler, who worked at the land office and who had never once spoken directly to Evelyn in 2 years, watched her pass with an expression she could not easily categorize. Not hostility. Something closer to the look of a person revising a conclusion they had held, without examining it. He tipped his hat. She nodded and went out. The attention was not comfortable. She had not come for it. But she noticed, with something that was not quite satisfaction, that the quality of it had changed. The town had been observing her for 2 years the way it observed any useful arrangement, noting her, factoring her in, not quite seeing her. Now something had shifted. It was a small shift and she did not trust it to hold, but it was there. 3 days later, Declan Rowe came to her door with a ledger under his arm and the look of a man who had made a deliberate decision to do something he wasn't entirely certain about. "I need someone to go through the North Pasture water records," he said. "The county recorder says they're in order. I'm not convinced." Evelyn looked at the ledger. "Why me?" Because you caught the clause, he said simply. There are accountants in Billings. I don't know the accountants in Billings. He held her gaze with the directness she had noticed at the courthouse. Not aggressive, simply honest. I know your work. She stepped back from the door and let him in. He sat at her kitchen table and she sat across from it, and they worked through the water records for 2 hours, with the focused quiet of people who were, both of them, accustomed to thinking in numbers and not particularly interested in filling time with words that weren't necessary. He was right to be suspicious. The county records showed a discrepancy in the acreage allocated to his north pasture well. A small error in the original survey, the kind of thing that would never matter until it did, until the day a drought reduced the county's water allocations, and the error became a legal dispute. She found it in the second hour, cross-referencing against a township plat she had in her own files. There, she said, turning the plat and the ledger so he could see both. Declan looked for a long time. How long has this been there? The survey's from 1884. So at least 7 years. He sat back. Something moved across his face, relief, and behind it, something more complicated. If I'd lost that well during a dry year, he stopped. You would have had a fight on your hands and bad paperwork to fight it with, Evelyn said. He nodded slowly. Then he said, What do I owe you? She named a fair rate. He didn't argue. He wrote it down in a small notebook he kept in his breast pocket, the way a man did when he intended to remember and pay, not perform the intention. Before he left, he paused at the door. My wife died in 1887, he said. It was not presented as an explanation or an appeal, simply a fact offered into the space between them, placed there carefully, like something he thought she might need to know. Fever. Same as a lot of people that year. Evelyn met his eyes. I know, she said. My husband too. 1888. Declan nodded. He put on his hat. I'll get the survey corrected with the county recorder this week, he said. I'll need a letter of finding from you if you're willing. I'll have it by Wednesday, she said. He left. She stood in the doorway for a moment after, the evening light long and warm across the yard, and felt something she recognized as careful. The particular carefulness of a person who had learned that warmth was not always what it appeared to be, that usefulness was not the same as being wanted, and that the distance between the two was precisely the distance she needed to keep track of. She went back inside and wrote the letter. In August, the creek dropped 8 inches in 2 weeks. The ranchers gathered at the county office to discuss allocation, and this time Evelyn was asked. Porter Aldane sent a note the previous afternoon. Brief, businesslike, containing no apology but carrying the acknowledgement of the invitation itself. Walter Breen sent a separate note that said simply, Your analysis of the Cade Agreement saved this county a considerable amount of trouble. I hope you'll continue to share your findings with us. She went. The meeting was larger than the courthouse gathering. 12 men, and, counting Evelyn, 1 woman. Nobody made a remark about this. She was not certain whether that was progress or courtesy. She decided it didn't matter. The water allocation discussion was technical and took 2 hours, and she contributed 3 times, each time with specific reference to the survey documents she had brought. Each time, the room listened, not unanimously, not without the occasional sideways glance that said, Are we taking this from a woman? But the listening happened, and the conclusions held. Declan Rowe sat across from her. He did not look at her more than the occasion required. He did not treat her differently in public than he had at her kitchen table, which was to say, with plain attention, without performance. She noticed that. Afterward, as the room cleared, he waited until the others had gone. Good arguments, he said. They were sound, she said. That's different. He almost smiled. You're hard to compliment. I don't need compliments, she said. I need the arguments to hold. They held, he said. She gathered her papers. He held the door. September brought the first real cool, and, with it, a cattle buyer from Helena named Ormond Vale who came to Harwick with cash and intentions, and the smooth certainty of a man who had made his money reading, which operations were struggling, and how much they could be pressured. He had an eye for distress and a way of arriving just when distress was most available. Declan Rowe's operation was on his list. Evelyn found out because Vale came to her, not directly. He came to Walter Breen first, and Walter Breen, to his credit, sent him away, and then walked up the road to tell Evelyn what had been asked. What Vale wanted was a valuation of the North Ridge operation. What he offered to pay for it was a fraction of what the land and water rights were worth, assuming Declan's water claim was still uncertain, which, as of the county meeting, it no longer was. He doesn't know the claim was corrected, Walter said. Does Declan know Vale is here? Evelyn asked. Walter's expression answered that. She found Declan at the feed merchant, loading a wagon with the focused economy of a man managing a tight season carefully. She told him plainly, the buyer, the offer, the outdated assumption about the water claim. She did not soften it. He went very still. When? He's at the hotel tonight. Declan set down the bag in his hands. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not alarm, not gratitude, but something more stripped than either. The look of a man who had prepared himself for a harder winter than this and found the ground had held where he expected it to fail. You didn't have to tell me, he said. No, she agreed. Why did you? She considered this honestly. Because the water claim is corrected and it's your information, she said. And because. She stopped, not quite certain how to finish. Because I think you would have done the same. He was quiet a moment. Then he said, I would have. She picked up one of the remaining bags from the merchant's step and set it in the wagon. She did not make it gracious or theatrical. He watched her do it, and he did not tell her she didn't need to, and she appreciated that. Ormond Vale left Harwick 2 days later, without the deal he had come for. He stopped at the land office before he left, as men like him often did, to ask general questions that were actually specific ones. Gerald Poe, the county recorder, told him the water claim on the North Ridge had been corrected and certified in August. Vale asked who had done the correcting. Poe told him. There was a version of events after this that Evelyn heard from Priscilla Sutter. Priscilla, who heard it from her husband, who had been in the land office that morning. It was the version where Vale had said, the widow runs this county, apparently, with a tone that was not quite a compliment and not quite a dismissal, the way a man spoke when something had outmaneuvered him, and he was deciding how to feel about it. Evelyn did not find this flattering. She found it accurate. October arrived, and with it the end of the dry season, the first frost on the North Ridge, and a conversation she had not planned for. Declan Rowe came to the door on a Tuesday evening with no ledger and no survey documents and no particular practical reason that she could identify. He stood with his hat in his hands the way he had stood the first evening at the courthouse steps, without performance, without preparation, as if he had decided to arrive and then let whatever came next come. I've been trying to find the right thing to say for about 3 weeks, he said. I haven't found it. Evelyn leaned against the doorframe. What were you trying to say? He looked at her directly. That what you did, the clause, the water record Vale. None of it was because you needed something from me. You did it because it was right. That's true, she said. And I've been sitting on my ridge thinking about what that means, he said. And what I've come to is that I've been alone for 4 years because I stopped trusting my own judgment about people. After my wife, he paused. My judgment about the land, the stock, the water rights, I trust that. But I stopped trusting what I thought I saw in people. Evelyn said nothing. She waited. I think I see you clearly, he said. And I'd like to know if there's anything between what you need professionally and what you might want otherwise. The plainness of it surprised her, not the words themselves. She had expected, if anything, something more cautious, more hedged. But the plainness. The willingness to say the thing directly without ornament, without calculation, without framing it as something else. She looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved through the cottonwoods at the edge of the yard. The first stars were beginning to show, faint and cold. I won't be needed into something, she said. I've been useful my whole life. That's not the same. I know, he said. You'd have to ask me what I think, she continued, and listen to what I say, even when it's about your ranch and you believe you already know. You've been right more often than I have, he said. That wouldn't be hard. It's hard for most men, she said. He accepted that without argument. She stood in the doorway for another moment. The evening was very still, the kind of stillness that comes after a long season of effort, when the land settles and the work pauses, and there is briefly, unexpectedly, space for something that is not work. I'm not making a decision tonight, she said. I'm not asking you to, he said. Then you can come in for coffee, she said, and we can talk about something that isn't water rights. For the first time, he smiled fully, not the almost smile she had seen before, but a real one, arriving slowly, the way things arrived for people who had been careful for a long time. He came inside. The coffee was plain and strong, and they sat at the kitchen table and talked for 2 hours about nothing that would matter to anyone else. His description of the North Ridge in early winter, the way the light came over it, the way she had felt the first time the Montana sky at dawn had seemed less foreign and more hers. Small things. True things. The kind of talk that happens between two people who have each been alone long enough to know the difference between filling silence and ending it. When he left, he said, Wednesday, I'll bring the final water documentation. For your records. Wednesday, she said. She watched him ride out of the yard with the practical, unhurried pace of a man who had somewhere to be and was not in a rush to get there. Inside, she washed the cups and put out the lamp and stood in the quiet kitchen for a moment before going to bed. She was not certain what was beginning. She was certain about what it was not. Not necessity, not arrangement, not a woman making herself small enough to fit into someone else's plan. Whatever it was, she had come to it on her own terms. And in Harwick, in the fall of 1891, in a county that was only beginning to understand what she was worth, that was something Evelyn Marsh had earned the right to stand in without apology.